Welcome to Cinema 5D on the Couch, the talk show with filmmakers and industry leaders. Brought to you by Film Convert, B&H, and Rode Microphones. This is your host, Nino Leitner.
Welcome to another episode of Cinema 5D on the Couch, here from the B&H stage at NAB 2015. Thanks to our sponsors B&H, Rode and Film Convert, we are able to welcome another round of elaborate guests. This time we have the underdogs of the camera industry, I would say. Although Blackmagic is a big company, you're still quite new to the market. So this is Tim from Blackmagic, Sebastian from Apertus, the open source camera, and Michelle from Kinefinity. So very interesting to have three very different camera manufacturers from three different continents actually here at the same time. You guys based in Australia. Apertus is very much open source, but it's the core team is in Europe, right? And Kinefinity from China. So yeah, very interesting. Let's start off with talking a little bit about your history and how each of your companies started making cameras and actually why. Where did you come from and what is your intention with entering this very competitive market of making cameras?
Would you like me to begin?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I think many people know Blackmagic Design because of our background in post-production. We have a long history of making video I/O hardware, and our history in posters comes from us as individuals. Everybody involved at senior level within Blackmagic Design comes out of the industry. I mean, we've worked for many years in television production, film production, and post-production. And as a result, we had a good understanding of the post-production workflow. A few years ago, we bought DaVinci, which I'm sure everybody remembers, and having a software application and hardware applications, we started to realize that a lot of our customers were using our hardware within post, but they weren't happy with the quality of images they were getting out of the cameras. They weren't particularly with the DSLR type cameras because they were very heavily compressed, they were very low bit rate. Also, there wasn't enough color depth within the images, and those images were going through our post-production workflows, which of course were designed for high resolution, high bit depth, and they were getting frustrated. And we were hoping that there would be a camera manufacturer out there was going to make something that was going to blow the industry away and give everybody the quality that they wanted for an affordable price. But it never happened. So we thought, well, we understand images, we understand post-production, we understand the issues that you go through in a post-production process, but we're not a camera manufacturer. Maybe we need to design a camera with post-production in mind. We need to look at the whole camera concept from a completely different perspective. Let's look at the things that you need in post and then try and incorporate that into a camera design. And that's about having a codec that doesn't have to go through multiple different conversions in order for you to use it in post and therefore degenerate the quality. It needs to be raw. It needs to have a bit depth that's going to be capable of then being taken in to do a beautiful color grade, to make it filmic, to make it cinematic. It needed to be a camera that had high dynamic range. And having that experience in post and having that experience working with colorists in DaVinci said, we need to design something that really thinks about that post-production workflow. And that's why we made the decision to make a camera, because we just felt there wasn't anything on the market that was affordable, but gave those features and gave those qualities that people were looking for within a camera technology.
Okay. Sebastian, where did you come from?
Well, it started off as a community project, basically. We were all filmmakers from different kinds of the world, different professions, and we just united in an online community to develop tools that we, as filmmakers, wanted to use. And that was still at the time where there were no large sensor diameter DSLRs, and pretty much all the manufacturers still built camcorders, even for the higher end users. And just wasn't much of the technology available that we have today, and we kind of felt like nobody really understands what we wanted to have at the time. And so the only way we kind of saw for us to do that is if we do that ourselves. If we start creating our own tools, our own cameras, and that was already 8 years by now. It started all in an online community forum, and over the time people gathered, it got more professional, we got more people involved. The beginning of the Apertus project, so to say, was by modifying a scientific industrial camera. That was the first one that was open source at the time and available at an affordable price. And that evolved over time, and the project kind of started with modifying this camera to make it suitable for filmmaking, a camera that we can operate, that we can use. And the next natural step was, because for scientists, all large diameter sensors are kind of pointless, because nobody that wants to gather scientific data needs that shallow depth of field. All the blurry area doesn't contain any information. So only the crazy filmmakers like us, we love exactly this shallow depth of field. And so the only way we could kind of solve that issue is by creating our own hardware and starting our own kind of project, not only as software and as things that we pull around the camera, but the camera itself. And that was like 2 or 3 years ago now that we launched the Axiom as project, which is now in the second generation. We built a proof of concept prototype like 18 months ago. Then ran a crowdfunding campaign, which was very successful, fortunately, and we gathered a large community that we wanted to supply with development hardware so they can participate in defining and creating that new kind of technology that we all want to have now. And yeah, now we are in the stage where the Axiom Beta, the one that we funded through that crowdfunding and developed afterwards, is hardware complete, or in the first revision hardware complete. And in the next couple of weeks to months, we will start rolling out, increasing production, rolling out early hardware to backers and developers, like the Magic Lantern team will be one of the very first folks who receive their hardware. And yeah, that's how we got to the place we are right now.
What's the advantage of having an open source camera as opposed to, for example, a camera from Blackmagic?
Yeah, well, it's an additional flexibility, it's an additional power that you regain over your tools. You know what's happening inside the camera, because yeah, it looks like a great camera, but does anybody really know what you're doing inside this camera? How you process the images, or what you do to the images when you write them? And a lot of filmmakers kind of need that control to really be able to live their craft or to innovate how they create images. And so our approach is that we give the entire control in the camera to everybody, basically, and then in the group or in the crowd together find the optimal or the best solutions to some of the problems. Like Magic Lantern, Canon never intended their DSLRs to do these things that Magic Lantern made them do. And we basically provide exactly this camera platform without all the countermeasures, without all the encryption, without all the artificial barriers that you add to a camera, so people don't get that access.
Mm-hmm. So Michel, Kinefinity, you're also quite new on the market, but already had a few cameras already, right? And now what is it called, the KineRAW 6K or KineMax 6K? Can you tell us a little bit about the history of Kinefinity?
So, in the beginning, there was like 5 years ago, there was a Chinese company who was manufacturing astro cameras, so cameras to take pictures of stars. Then they said, hey, let's build a cinema camera. And they went to the best university in Beijing, got a bunch of engineers together, code writers and electronic engineers, and they launched the project of Kinefinity. 2 years in, they produced their first working prototype, and shortly after, I think another year after, they started to ship the first prototype. And shortly after that, they started step by step to improve upon the given model. First, they made it smaller, and then made it better, and then this one is now the 4th generation of their camera, so which is a 6K RAW camera, which can process 6K RAW in camera, and yeah, that's basically it for the camera. The other thing they have just launched is like a speed booster, which reduces the crop factor to 1.1. So which makes this camera a 6K RAW camera with a Super 35 sensor, but with this speed booster you get, actually it's called the Kine Enhancer not speed booster. You get almost like a full frame camera.
So what kind of, is that a PL lens mount?
So this is like a PL mount, but it's made for to attach adapters. This is an EF mount, active EF, so you can change the iris of your EF lenses, and they also provide PL mount and other mounts.
Okay. So is this camera available already?
Yeah, it's shipping in China right after NAB. First in China, so that if there's any bugs, they need to call them back. It's easier, and in May they will ship internationally.
Yeah, my colleague Johnny Behiri at Cinema 5D already tested it and liked it quite a lot actually, and he has high hopes for the camera. So yeah, so we already started with your product. Let's continue with the new Blackmagic cameras. I think this will take a while now because you introduced a lot of new cameras, right?
We try to innovate as quickly as we can do, and this year has been one of those years where we've been listening to what customers have been asking for with all the range of cameras that we've manufactured. Last year was a big year for us with the announcement of the Ursa camera, and with the Ursa we wanted to design a camera that was a features-orientated camera, something that was very high resolution, very high dynamic range, something that was more of a fixed position type camera, suitable for features, but was capable of working with a crew. A lot of the feedback we got back from the design of that camera was brilliant, absolutely perfect, but we'd like to have the same kind of features in a smaller package, so that as an independent shooter, as a small documentary maker, or for a drama production, something that's a bit easier to handle, something that's lighter weight. One of the other things that we did last year was with the Ursa, we announced that the sensor on the camera was going to be upgradable. And we wanted to demonstrate that that was absolutely true. And we wanted to show that that camera was designed as a platform for us to continue to develop upon. So this year at the show, there's 4 major announcements from us. The first one is a brand new sensor, and this is a custom design sensor that we've been working on now for over 12 months. That sensor is a 4.6K sensor. It's Super 35 size, global shutter, and it has 15 stops of dynamic range. And we're really pleased with the images that we're getting out of that. And having looked at them and seen those images, it's as close to film stock as I've seen. In fact, it's better than some of the film stock that I've seen. So, I'm really pleased with the quality of images we're getting from that sensor. And with that sensor, we're adding it as an optional upgrade onto the Ursa. So if anybody's already purchased an Ursa, they can buy a sensor upgrade to that camera. It's $2,000. It'll be shipping in August. And they'll be able to unscrew the current sensor and turret and change that, and either change it from a PL to EF or EF
People
to
can
PL.
do it themselves?
They can do it themselves. And the whole design of the camera was to make it easy. I think there are a lot of cameras which are cumbersome, which are difficult to manage, which are difficult to maintain, and we knew that we wanted this to be a process that was simple to do. So within the industrial design of the Ursa, it's a simple change for both the sensor and also for the turret. Of course, if anybody's not comfortable with doing that themselves, if they don't feel technically inclined, then both our resale channel and also our Blackmagic offices around the world can do that. It doesn't take long to do. It's about a 20-minute job, but it needs to be done properly. So going up on our website will be an instruction manual and also a tutorial video to help any customers who want to try it to do it themselves. And if they're not happy with it, then bring it into your local reseller and they'll do it for you. But it's nice because it means that if anybody has an Ursa, then they can upgrade it to the new sensor if they want to. We've also reduced the price of the sensor by $1,000 because we wanted there to be a clear differential between the 4K sensor, which we have been shipping now for the last year, and also the 4.6K. But we didn't want anybody who bought the 4K sensor today to have to pay a premium to step up to the 4.6K. So the sensor upgrade is $2,000, and the difference in the camera price is $2,000. So if somebody wanted to buy the 4K today and upgrade tomorrow, actually there's not a price penalty to pay for making that decision further down the road. So it makes it easy for them. And they should be shipping in about August. When they start to ship, we're going to prioritize as a manufacturer our current customers. So if anybody already owns an Ursa and they'd like an upgrade to their sensor, they will get that sensor first before it goes into any of the new cameras that we've announced at the show. We've also announced 3 new cameras at the show. The biggest announcement is that smaller version of the Ursa, and it's called the Ursa Mini. It's a completely new design. It's a beautiful looking camera. And we've changed the way that we manufacture the chassis on the camera. So rather than use an aluminium chassis, we're now using a magnesium chassis. So it gives us just as much strength but it's a third of the weight of the Ursa. I mean, it's really is a feather-light camera. It weighs 2.5 kilograms. It's beautiful to look at. It has a lovely fold-out 5-inch OLED HD display, so it's easy to see, it's easy to work with. Same as the Ursa, it's available in both EF and PL mounts, and it's available with our new 4.6K sensor and also with the 4K sensor that we had before. So the 4K sensor is going to be available probably around August time, and that'll be $2,995. And the 4.6K sensor will be available end of August, start of September, and that's going to be available at $4,995. In addition to that, we've launched a range of accessories for that camera. Things like a shoulder mount, a handle, grip, and that's available as an optional package.
Oh, the handle is not part of it?
No, the handle, the shoulder mount, and the extension arm for shoulder grip is all part of a single package. The shoulder mount actually been designed so that it has a tripod mount on the bottom of it, so you can move it from shoulder to tripod to shoulder without having to change any accessories on the camera. That package actually, we wanted to make it as cost effective as possible to go, you know what, just put the package together and it does everything for me. So that's going to be available at the same time as the camera, and that's going to be $395. So it means I get everything there that I need for a relatively small investment, but it means I can start shooting RAW, I can shoot that high dynamic range, I've got a fantastic sensor with high resolution, and so for any independent filmmakers, documentary, drama, or anybody shooting features, this now becomes actually a beautiful camera to use because you have that combination of the high dynamic range, RAW and resolution. We've also announced at the show our own viewfinder for the Ursa and also for the Ursa Mini. It's the same viewfinder. And that viewfinder has industry standard connections on it, so it uses XLR 12 volt for power.
So you can use that on all kinds of cameras?
Could use it on any camera. One of the things that we're very keen on is making sure that the infrastructure, the connections we use, the software we use is as compatible with as many things as possible without being too closed. So when you look at our cameras, they don't have proprietary connections on them, they're familiar connections, things like typical SDI BNCs, because it means anybody can plug anything into them. And it's very frustrating when you buy into an ecosystem of a brand that all of a sudden you have to continue to buy into that ecosystem, and therefore you're paying over the odds for technology to plug into those products. And you end up going down a road where you end up investing a huge amount of money into something that actually doesn't cost that much to make. And as a user, as a customer myself, that's very, very frustrating. And that's why we would never put that into our products. So things like viewfinder connections, we want that to be open. And if somebody wants to use it on an Ursa, fantastic. If they'd like to use it on another camera, brilliant, we're pleased because it means that the concept works. That viewfinder is a lovely viewfinder. It has a high definition OLED display. And when you look through the viewfinder, it looks like an optical viewfinder. You can't see the pixels, it looks absolutely beautiful. And it has lots of features built in. It has some programmable buttons on the top. And it also has a focus chart, a digital focus chart built into the viewfinder, so that when you look through it, you can focus the diopter perfectly for your eye, so you know that when you're shooting through the camera, your shots are absolutely in focus. That's also going to be shipping in July for $1,495.
But you also announced 2 small cameras.
We have, yeah. So in addition to the Ursa
Which
Mini,
is, funnily enough, very similar in size to the Apertus Axiom prototype.
very similar in size, but very different in concept.
Yeah.
Very different in concept. This is an evolution based on requests that we've had from a lot of our customers who've been using the Pocket Cinema camera, which we announced, I think, 2 years ago. That camera was designed as a very small, mobile, fun, Super 16 digital film camera. Something that gave fantastic image quality, but wasn't overly intrusive. It was small, you can put it in your pocket, and just go out and have fun shooting stuff. What we found with that camera was that whilst we thought it was just going to be a fun camera, actually it ended up being used a lot on feature films, it ended up being used a lot in drama, in documentary, in television serials, where it was used as because of its size but incredible image quality, as a stunt camera or a crash camera or a drone camera, actually in areas that we never expected. And a lot of those guys came to us and they said, look, we really love that camera because of the sensor, because of the pictures, it's got the dynamic range, it's got RAW recording, but it's got a screen on the back. And when I put it against in an odd location, I can't see the screen, so that doesn't help me. All the buttons are on the back. And again, if I put it in a strange location, I can't use it. It's frustrating. Could you help? So we said, well, okay, that's an interesting idea.
So you thought, let's get rid of the screen altogether, and you can never see it. No, I'm kidding.
If you don't need it, why have it? Right?
Yeah.
If you don't need it, why have it? And so the pocket camera was designed for the creative user in mind, but actually it's been used in very different technical applications. So we thought, let's make a camera that has a better technical application. And actually we've made two. This one is the micro cinema camera. This one has a Super 16 size HD sensor. So this records HD 1920 1080. It records that 12-bit with 12 stops of dynamic range into a RAW file. So very similar in that respect to the pocket camera. However, it's made from a magnesium chassis, so it's made to be robust. It doesn't have a screen on the back, but what it does have is a high-capacity battery to give you that extended battery life. And what we've done with both of those cameras is move the buttons from the back to the front, so it's easy to use when it's in a strange location. And we've put a light on the front, a tally light, so that the operator knows then when the camera is operational and when it's recording. So that all makes reasonable sense. But what we've also done with this camera is add a full-size HDMI out for monitoring. So once the camera is in location, a simple mobile monitor can be plugged in and checked for framing, and also to change the settings on the camera if needed. And the unique thing we've done with both of the cameras, both this one and its studio version, which is the same size, is add an expansion port. And we wanted this camera to be hackable. We wanted it to be a camera.
Open source? No?
We wanted it to be a camera that anybody could use, anybody could play with.
So everybody can do software for it?
So this uses two programming protocols. And the protocols are actually ones that are very familiar in the drone industry. Because one of the applications we thought would be really cool for this is in drones. So this uses two protocols. It uses PWM, and it uses another protocol called S-Bus. And on this expansion port here, it supports 2 channels of PWM and 18 channels of S-Bus. And over those protocols, you can control almost any function of that camera. So you can control camera settings, camera operations, but you can also control the lens. So if it's an electronic micro four thirds lens, you can control zoom, focus, iris from the S-Bus or PWM control. Also built into that is a voltage output for power and a composite video output for sending the video feed from the camera over RF back to the location where the operator may be. So this now means that using protocols which are well used within the industry, I can now control this camera from any location and also get a return feed from the camera over RF so I can see exactly what that camera's doing. So we wanted this to be strong, robust, rugged, easy to use, easy to operate, and also remote controllable. And we're hoping that lots of people who are writing software are able to use those protocols and start controlling and doing fun things.
So there are two versions, the one is 4K and one is full HD?
Yeah.
I have one question for you. Why is the HD version called Cinema and the 4K version Studio, which confuses me a bit? Okay,
so there's two different sensors that we're using. This one is an evolution of the Pocket Cinema camera, and this sensor gives us a very high dynamic range and the ability to record 12-bit color. The Studio version uses a different sensor. The Studio sensor is the same sensor used in our production studio camera. And that sensor, whilst it's higher resolution, doesn't have the same levels of dynamic range. And that's why we're not using it within here. Cinema is not about resolution. It's about color depth, it's about feel. And this gives you fantastic color depth, it gives you fantastic feel because it's a beautiful HD sensor. We wouldn't use that sensor in this type of camera, it's a different type of sensor. That camera is designed for studio use, and rather than having the SD recording, it has SDI inputs and outputs. And with that camera, we can send control protocols to the camera over SDI, including talkback, including tally, including camera control. And also with that camera, it also has an expansion port, so you can do things like PTZ control from the SDI out over this expansion port to control a remote head. So it's a slightly different design of camera. The other differences are that this will shoot global shutter on this sensor up to 30 frames per second, whereas the Ultra HD sensor is a studio sensor, and that is only a rolling shutter. Yeah. So it's a slightly different type of sensor. It's interesting what you said about what makes a camera image cinematic. What makes the camera image from the Axiom cinematic?
I think before we talk about the image, you have to talk about kind of the sustainability of the platform. Because when you design a camera for a particular purpose, like this is made for drones or this is made for an action camera, you always have to keep in mind what the customer will end up wanting to do with that camera. And I think the big difference here with our project or our approach is that we know that we can't think of any possible applications that users come up with. But we still give them the ability and the flexibility to still do all that without our approval firsthand. So you keep like innovating and seeing customer demands and creating new cameras for every kind of special application, but you're always lacking behind what users kind of bring to you. And in our case, we provide the platform so users can add that extra, that final step themselves. So if there's someone who has an application that we have no idea about today, maybe something that will be very interesting in a year or so, with our platform, that's kind of simple to take this as a basic foundation and then just innovate on top of this. We don't even have to get active to do that. So what is important for us is that this is a platform. It creates an ecosystem by itself, and we don't limit people in what they are doing with it. And if we talk about image and looks, for example, we all know that we can apply different LUTs and we can play with raw settings from development software and so on. But you never get access to what is happening before that in the camera. And with our approach, the entire image pipeline is open, accessible and modifiable by everyone. And the look isn't just a color transformation. There's a lot of things that already on the level of the sensor affect the image. And currently, no manufacturer lets you actually change the parameters and the registers that control the sensor.
But what, let's say I'm an average user,
Yes.
which I am, so I cannot program your camera. Let's say your project is, in the market for 2-3 years. Do you expect to have a community that supports each other, or is there a website where I can go to actually access those versions that enthusiastic programmers might have programmed for that camera, or how do you expect this to pan out in the future?
Yeah, we're in the process of creating a kind of platform for exactly these kind of things. You can imagine it like an app store, where instead of downloading apps to your phone, you can download new functionality to your camera in whatever way that in the end works, if it's hardware related, software related, or related to the user interface. And like with Magic Lantern, you also have people from all over the world who contribute tiny parts or tiny apps, if you say so, and they make it available, and you can again then use them, modify them, adapt them for your own requirements. So that's of the kind of flexibility that platform should provide for us. Also accessing the actual image pipeline and defining that look in ways that are just not possible with any other camera. So that's also an app in the end. You can download a new kind of stock maybe, so to say.
Yeah. So Michel, the Kinefinity product and all the cameras, I think very much aim more to higher end cinema applications, and they are probably targeted more or less at the masses, I think, and more at somebody who, alternatively might look at a Red Epic or something like that. Is that the type of customer you have, or are there other applications as well? Or why chooses somebody a Kinemax camera over a Red Epic, for example?
Yeah, so basically Kinefinity is focused on the cinematographers market. Their cameras should be considered as serious film tools, but their aim is always to bring these very high resolutions and the raw format, which many users, especially if they come from a DSLR environment, are still frightened of. Try to make it more user-friendly, more accessible to a wider range of people. One thing is making the hardware easy to use and compatible with as many as possible, you could say, third-party items, or allowing to use different lenses. The other thing is with software, providing workflows that offer simple to understand and to implement solutions, which as well big production companies as a one person can easily implement.
Is it possible for your clients as well? Is it open source, or can they change something about the internals of the camera or how the image is actually processed, or is that kind of how you give it to them?
Yeah, that's no. It's currently not possible to change any of the how the information is processed in camera, and yeah, that's not the focus of this camera.
Yeah, it's interesting that all three of you are very much in line in terms of providing the users with raw images, without any modifications, whereas the traditional manufacturers like Sony, Canon, Panasonic very much rely on compression, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for many applications. So how do you feel you would serve, especially you, for example, with because I don't think you have any compression plan for your cameras. So, but in terms of practical use, very often RAW is a bit over the top for many applications. But will an open source programmer have actually the processing power within your camera to actually implement some kind of compression algorithm, or what do you expect?
Yeah, maybe it gets a little bit technical now, but I think that's a point where this is appropriate now.
So only the two colleagues will understand you now.
You'll just edit it out afterwards. What we do about image processing is that it doesn't run on a processor per se, but it runs in real time and on FPGA. So you can do a lot of things in real time without using processing power, so to say. But the FPGA architecture is kind of a definition how electronics react to certain input levels, and this all happens in real time. So even very complex like compression or certain kind of data analysis algorithms can be implemented in real time if the way it is created is matching the requirements, so to say. So compression is not a problem at all. We just think that as a first step, we want to provide all the data that there is. And you can always reduce it afterwards if you want to, but the first step should always be to provide the maximum amount of data, the maximum amount of quality. And if somebody wants to implement a compression inside the FPGA, so to say, he's free to do so. But we will only focus or only limit ourselves to technology that doesn't restrict the user under any license restrictions or any royalty restrictions. So there are a lot of very good open source codecs, for example, and we will definitely look into some of them and if they make sense in this scope, but ProRes will probably be something that will never find its way into the core of the camera.
But as far as I know, maybe you can answer this question, Apple does not charge for the license. They just need to sign off your product, basically. They need to see it first, and then there's a pigeon, by the way. That's very random. That just threw me off. Anyway, no, but as far as I know, Apple, gives away ProRes for free, but they need to actually accept your product, so to speak. Yeah. So, but maybe you can say something about that.
That's also a limitation, like waiting for Apple's approval is not something we are aiming at.
You can't say anything,
no,
right?
I think it's an interesting. Talk about Apple is a different subject altogether. I think there are processes you need to follow in order to comply with the structure of supporting ProRes, and it's a complex process to ensure it's done properly. I think when you start talking about compression as a subject and the need for compression, absolutely there's a need for compression, and there's also a need for RAW. You can't say one is better than the other for any particular reason, other than the customer has a particular need to do something a particular way. RAW has a benefit, but it also has a consequence, and in certain applications you need to have compression. I think when you start to look at compression, you're always going to look at a trade-off somewhere or another. And the question is always, is that compression suitable for what it is I want to do? Is it a distribution codec or is it an acquisition codec? How fast is it through my pipeline in post-production? Is it going to go through post-production or is it going to get broadcast straight to web? And therefore, suitable codecs exist for suitable reasons. I think when you start looking at codecs in camera, a camera is always an acquisition process. And at that point, you want to have the option of getting the best possible quality from that camera. When you look at the economics of our industry, the speed through that process from production through to post-production and then through to delivery to the client will determine the cost effectiveness of your entire operation. The quality that you deliver will be determined by that codec that you shoot on, and your speed is going to be determined by the codec that you shoot on. So making a decision about the right type of codec is critical to your success commercially and also as an image maker. And users in our industry are interested in fundamentally two things. I think there's creative users who want to go out and make beautiful pictures. That's me, that's who I was, that's who I am. I like making beautiful pictures. And then you've got commercial people who are more interested in the end results, going, if I can make this happen, I get paid at the end of it, because that puts food on the table and pays my mortgage. And there's a lot of us in the middle who kind of go, I need to do both. I'm a creative guy, but I need to pay the bills at the same time. And I think a camera is only a tool, and you have to have the right tool for the job. I'm getting paid to make beautiful pictures, or I'm getting paid to deliver something to somebody. I need a solution that helps me solve that problem. And I need it to be capable of delivering my creative vision, but effectively, and also in such a way that it gives the client what they need in a time frame that's economically affordable. And when you start to talk about RAW and you start to talk about compression, all of that comes into play. And I think depending upon the output, depending upon the client's needs, and depending upon your workflow and infrastructure, you need to choose something which has appropriate compression for what it is you want to do.
Yeah. I have a question for you regarding camera development. If you look at your big competitors like Sony, Canon, also Red, which is also not huge, but they are big. But they all take a long time to develop cameras.
Okay.
Now, over the past few years, with almost every industry trade show, we've seen new Blackmagic cameras. Are you developing them, like, do you take only a year, or is it just, because it seems like you're churning out cameras like crazy at an incredible speed, whereas others take much longer?
I mean, I can't speak for anybody else because I don't know how their development cycles work. We kind of have an ethos when we come to these big trade shows like NAB, or we go to IBC, or any trade show for that matter. What's important for us at those trade shows is not what happens on other people's booths with their cameras or anybody else's cameras. It's not really that important. The important things for us is what's happening in the aisles of the trade show. What's being spoken about? What are the things that people need? What are the future trends? Because we are able to develop and move very fast as an organization. We've got fantastic engineers, we've got fantastic software developers, we've got fantastic industrial designers who really know what they're doing. And we were able to utilize those skills in such a way that we can react very quickly to the needs of our customers. And that's why we have products like this, where people turn around to us and go, I'm using your camera for doing this job, but it would be awesome if you could make it do this, or you could make it do that. And we'll listen to what's going on around the show, and literally within 6 months we'll go from concept to camera, or concept to new products. Because we have the engineering resources, we have the focus, we have the determination, we have the passion, we have the energy, and we have the skills. So our turnaround time becomes very fast. We're not thinking 10 years or 20 years into the future. We don't have levels of bureaucracy within the business. It's a very flat organization. Everybody's involved. We all talk to each other. Everybody has direct lines into engineering. Everybody has direct lines into product management. And it means if you've got a good idea and you talk to us about it, if we can make it happen, we can make it happen. And we can do it fast. And it's nice being in that position because things change so quickly. And what's hot today is not going to be the same next year, and that's why we need to move quickly. Yeah.
But you're still relatively new in this business too, so as everybody who's new in the beginning, it's hard, I guess. I mean, just remember the first camera was delayed a few times, and there were some issues with quality in the very beginning, but you addressed them quite quickly. You announced this camera to be, I think, shipped in July. Yeah. And you think this is realistic, or?
Yeah,
having said that, this time they seem much more final than 2 years ago, the cameras.
Well, I think compared to, this is relative to what happened 3-4 years ago with our very first camera. And we had some delays with that camera because getting access to the sensors from the manufacturer, well, there was a massive delay. And as a new camera manufacturer, no one really takes you seriously. You know, because you're new, people don't know you as a camera manufacturer, and you know, it's a difficult thing to start to do, especially in high volume, which is what Blackmagic do. Now, actually, there's less of an issue, and it's less of a problem. We're always very optimistic. You know, we have a vision that we want to deliver those cameras in the time frames we want to deliver them. And at this moment, we don't see any reason why that won't be the case. Yeah. However, what I'll also say is we're human. You know, we have dreams and we have aspirations. We want these cameras to be available because we love these cameras and we want to get them out there as soon as we can. But what we won't do is we won't ship it early. If we feel that perhaps we're not happy with the quality control on the camera and it's not 100%, we will stop it and we will delay it, because we don't want something to go into customers' hands that we don't feel really represents where we are now as a camera manufacturer. But yes, we feel optimistic that we're definitely going to hit those ship dates.
Let's talk a bit about a little bit more sensitive subject. Well, sensors. We all know that developing camera sensors is a very, very expensive, time-consuming process, and it probably only pays off if you build millions of them, or thousands at least. So you guys have to source your sensor technology from somewhere. I won't ask you where you get it from, but just let's talk about how hard it is to find the right sensor for your type of cameras. Because the big guys, Sony, Canon, they do their own sensor technology, but they don't sell it to anyone, which differentiates their camera from the rest, I would say. So it makes it harder for the little guys to actually get sensors that they need. How do you deal with that, and how do you actually find the sensor that you need?
Who should go first? Yeah.
Actually, I'm not in charge of that, so I'm not really authorized to speak too much about that.
That's okay.
But from what I know is that either Kinefinity goes out to search for a sensor, or sensor manufacturers approach them. And then it's a process of testing which one is the best fitting, and it's like you say, it's if the amount, the volume you purchase is not high enough, they are very expensive, and Kinefinity just at this point cannot buy 10,000 sensors. So yeah, it's a
tough balance.
Yeah, it's a difficult topic for them, but I think actually I know that for this camera they have solved it quite well. From what we've seen of the image quality, the sensor is very good. So
yeah. Sebastian?
Yeah, well, we are probably the only ones who can openly say which sensor manufacturer we're using and who the other guys are. But honestly, I'm not entirely sure I understand why everybody keeps it so much of a secret. Because if you buy the camera, you can just open it up and you see immediately what sensor is inside. So,
well, you probably know, because you
no, but
deal
in any
with
camera, you can buy any camera and look inside, and you can compare it to what's available on the market. And there aren't that many sensor manufacturers that create large diameter sensors in the world. And if you just look at the websites, you can see that's probably the sensor this camera is using. So I guess it comes down to this inaccessibility of the internals of most camera manufacturers, that the sensor is, of course, a very essential component in the image capturing pipeline. Definitely, it's the film stock, as we say now in digital, definitely. But at the times of real film stocks, they even printed the response curves of the different colors on the actual labels of the film stock. And nowadays, nobody's even sharing what sensor they're using. Even that response curve of the sensors could be available. Why isn't anybody sharing that? Everybody can measure it in the end. Why isn't the manufacturer already laying that into the open? And I don't know, maybe we can set an example in that direction at one point. Maybe others will realize that this is an advantage for the customer in the end, and not something you're giving away from your own product that you don't want to.
But it's not only about the sensor. I mean, we see, especially with upgrades to camera electronics. Like a good example is Canon C100. The first generation uses the same sensor as the second generation, and if you compare, they just use better processing. So if you compare the higher ISOs in the Mark II of the C100, you see there's much less noise than there was in the first generation, which can only be attributed to the processing because the sensor is the same.
Yeah.
So I think that is something that many people overlook, I guess.
There's even more. There's not just the sensor and what you do with the data, there's even the way you treat the sensor, or the way you interpret the footage from the sensor. And of course, everybody who's building cameras now wants to keep his advantage in how he's doing it, all the ideas he came up with in doing that to himself, because it's a market advantage, no questions asked, definitely. But the one that's suffering from this kind of, I won't tell you what I'm doing, is the end user, of course. And are there really that many ways or kind of patterns that give you an competitive advantage over the others? I don't know. I think in the end, what we are doing in our cameras is in large parts very similar. And yeah, I hope our approach will kind of open the eyes of the big ones to kind of realize that giving at least some pieces, it can grow over time away from this control or from this kind of shutting off the end user from the product.
Well, I think a lot has changed over the years in general.
Definitely.
I mean, if you think back only a few years ago, you know, before even the Red was around, I think Red definitely changed the market for the better for the customer, because they kind of broke into,
thankful for kind of starting this revolution and making people aware that they are not 100% dependent on Sony or Canon to make a camera for them, that it's something like this is actually possible now, technically and socially, so to say. But I think there's still a long way to go. But I remember that when we started with the project, open source was something that was common in certain aspects of IT and of web server technology, but in filmmaking it was a very proprietary landscape, and open source was mostly associated with that doesn't work well, or that looks terrible, or the idea behind it wasn't what's driving it, but the impressions people got from bad examples of these kinds of projects. And so a lot of what we were doing and are still doing is making people aware that open source is not a danger. Open source is not destroying the industry or destroying, it's not a business model. Open source is a business model, it's just a different business model. You kind of focus more on services and on customization.
Well, I think from the software industry is a good example. There's a lot of open source operating systems that live well alongside proprietary solutions, and whereas the masses still work with the proprietary solutions, there is very particular uses where open source totally makes sense.
Definitely.
But what's your position about the sensor issue?
It's an interesting one, because I mean, we use multiple different sensors, and it's always a challenge to find the right sensor based upon the demands of the camera. Fundamentally, you don't build the camera around the sensor. What you're doing is you have a desire to produce something to do a specific job, and you need to find the sensor that's capable of doing the job and delivering the creative vision of the user. And in this industry, this is just a tool. It's not the end result. And ultimately, it needs to do something for somebody to create something. And that's why having solutions often work better for a lot of creative people, because they understand what it is and what it does. Finding sensors that deliver those results has always been a challenge. Fortunately, we're in a position now as a larger manufacturer where it's becoming easier. And with our latest sensor, it's more of a custom design sensor. And we're able to have a lot more influence over the generation, the creation and the design of that sensor in order to do what we want, rather than trying to find something that already exists. However, buying the sensor isn't the solution. And as my colleague here was saying, it's about the electronics processing that goes around that sensor and the image processing that goes around that sensor in order to get the best from it. And those sensors that you buy on the market can be used on lots of different products, lots of different applications. And with imaging applications, digital imaging, chemical imaging, plant processing, lots of different reasons why those sensors exist. What we're doing in this industry is we're using that technology and getting the best out of that technology based around the creative needs of what people want to do with digital film production. So it's more than just about buying a sensor. It's about understanding how to integrate that sensor, get the best from it, keep it cool, reduce the noise floor, ensure you're getting the best color accuracy out of that sensor, calibrating it to deliver the result that you need. And that's where the science of camera design really comes in. And I think we've been quite fortunate in that the larger we become, we have a bit more control over that process now. But beginning, it was very difficult because we're a small company and nobody knows us. And to be starting out in creating cameras, it's got to be a challenge.
Okay. We have to wrap it up, but I have one last question to you. Why does the Ursa Mini not come with built-in ND filters?
That's a good question. Personally, I would very much like to see that in a future camera, but currently it doesn't. And I couldn't tell you why, because I didn't design it. But I think it would be a good idea for something for us to consider in the future.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for watching this episode of Cinema 5D on the Couch. We had the 3 underdogs of the camera manufacturers here today. And tune in for the next episode. Thanks to our sponsors B&H, Rode Microphones and Film Convert. See you soon.